The road to St. Mary's Convent was little more than a ribbon of gravel swallowed by fog. Clara Westwood held her coat tight against the damp English wind, watching the carriage driver's silhouette blur ahead of her. The man refused to go farther than the iron gate, muttering that no one in the nearby village dared approach the convent after sundown. When Clara pressed him for a reason, he only said, "Because they still ring the bells at midnight, and the sisters have been gone for 3 years." The gate groaned as she pushed it open. Beyond it stretched a garden strangled by weeds, statues of saints leaning at odd angles, their faces streaked with moss like tears. The convent itself loomed beyond, a gray fortress of stone, its high windows like watching eyes. Despite the years of abandonment, a faint candlelight flickered behind one of the arched panes. Clara was no stranger to darkness. She had worked with the Ministry of Public Affairs as a historical investigator, tasked with documenting unexplained cases tied to religious institutions. St. Mary's had been shuttered after 6 nuns vanished without a trace in 1920. Their names were still written in parish records, their belongings untouched. But no graves had ever been found. Inside, the convent smelled of dust and cold incense. Her footsteps echoed down the marble corridor, where the portraits of long-dead abbesses hung in ornate frames. A heavy silence pressed in on her, the kind that seemed to listen. "Is anyone here?" she called out. Her voice carried too far. A faint sound answered, the creak of a door, the shuffling of cloth. She followed it to the chapel, its pews lined in perfect rows beneath a crucifix blackened by age. Prayer books still lay open as if waiting to be read. On the altar, melted candles had hardened into grotesque shapes, like faces frozen in agony. Clara felt a chill brush the back of her neck. She turned. An old nun stood in the doorway, her veil torn, her hands trembling around a wooden rosary. Her eyes, pale and sunken, fixed on Clara as if she were an intruder. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Clara steadied herself. "My name is Clara Westwood. I've been sent to document what happened here." The nun said nothing for a long time. Then, slowly, she replied, "They told you it was a disappearance, didn't they? That they simply vanished?" "Yes," Clara said cautiously. "6 of them." The nun stepped forward. "It was not 6. It was 7. And the 7th still walks." Clara frowned. "Who are you?" The woman clutched her rosary tighter. "Sister Agnes, the last who remains." Agnes guided her to a small office behind the chapel, the Mother Superior's quarters. Dust-covered journals filled the shelves. On the desk lay a single candle, still burning though the wax had nearly melted through. She gestured for Clara to sit. "They prayed for silence," Agnes said, voice thin as parchment. But the silence answered. Clara opened one of the old journals. The ink had bled from moisture, but some words were still legible. "The angel descends tonight. We must prepare our voices for his mercy." "An angel?" Clara asked. Agnes gave a broken laugh. "If that was an angel, then God had abandoned us long before." Outside, the wind rattled the stained glass windows. Somewhere above, a bell tolled once, long and hollow. Agnes flinched. "No one should be here after dusk," she said quickly. "You must go. You do not understand what sleeps beneath this place." Clara's curiosity burned brighter than her fear. Beneath, Agnes's gaze drifted toward the floorboards. Under the chapel, the door was sealed by Mother Helena herself. She said it was God's will. Clara leaned forward. "What's under there, sister?" But Agnes had already begun to pray, her voice trembling. That night, Clara set up her small typewriter and oil lamp in the guest quarters. The convent creaked around her, with settling or perhaps something more. She noted every detail. The age of the walls, the pattern of the windows, the strange hush that grew deeper after sunset. Her reports were meant to be factual, clinical, but she found herself writing words she couldn't explain. "There is movement in the silence. The air feels alive." Near midnight, she heard it. Faint, rhythmic chanting. Latin words, though distorted, coming from below the chapel. Clara grabbed her lamp and followed the sound through the hall. Her footsteps echoed, but another set seemed to follow, light, dragging. At the end of the corridor stood a door she hadn't seen before. It was iron, half hidden behind an old tapestry. She pulled the fabric aside and saw the carvings etched into the metal. Crosses, eyes, and a phrase scratched into the rust. The silence of angels is death. The handle was cold. Locked. From behind the door came a single whisper, so soft she almost thought she imagined it. Clara! Her lamp flickered, and in its dying light she saw footprints. Bare, small, leading away down the hall. The faint smell of iron filled the air. She backed away, her pulse hammering, and returned to her room. But when she closed the door, she found something new on her desk. A prayer book she hadn't unpacked. It was open to a verse she did not remember reading before. And the 7 shall kneel, their tongues stilled, until his mercy finds no voice. The wind howled through the broken glass. The bell tolled again 3 times now. Clara turned out the lamp and sat in the dark, heart pounding. The walls seemed to breathe. By dawn, the fog had thickened so much that the convent seemed suspended in a sea of milk. Clara barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard faint whispers. Not words, exactly, but breaths forming in her ear, melting away when she turned her head. The lamp had burned out hours ago. Yet when she awoke, the flame was somehow still alive. Downstairs, the chapel felt colder than before. The candles on the altar were fresh, new wax, still soft to the touch. But Clara hadn't lit them. She called out for Sister Agnes, but her voice only bounced back in soft echoes that didn't quite match her rhythm. The air trembled. Agnes? She tried again. A distant voice answered, faint, fragile, from the far end of the corridor. Here. She followed the sound. The hall stretched on far longer than she remembered, lined with doors that looked identical yet slightly off, as if the walls themselves had rearranged in the night. From behind one of them came a slow knocking, steady, deliberate. Clara pressed her ear against the wood, whispering. Dozens of voices, women's voices soft as prayer. She pulled back in shock. The whispering stopped. The knocking did not. She turned the handle, locked. Another knock now from behind her. Then another from the next door down. Within seconds, the entire corridor seemed alive. Doors thudding softly, voices murmuring behind each one. A low hum built beneath the floorboards. A vibration she felt through her shoes, deep as a heartbeat. Her breath quickened. Who's there? All at once, silence. Then a whisper. Right beside her ear, though no one stood there. The walls remember. Clara stumbled back, heart pounding, and the whisper seemed to move with her. Slipping along the plaster, crawling like a shadow. When she raised her lamp, she saw faint indentations in the walls. Not cracks, but shapes. Fingers. Dozens of them, pressing out from inside the stone as if something beneath the surface was trying to reach through. A scream tore through the convent. Clara ran toward the sound, down the main staircase, through the corridor that led to the refectory. The air grew thicker, cloying, as though the building exhaled damp breath. She burst into the dining hall and froze. Sister Agnes was on her knees at the far end of the table, trembling, eyes fixed on the crucifix. Around her, the walls pulsed faintly with shadow, and a low, rhythmic hum filled the space, like a chant rising from beneath the floor. Clara rushed to her. Agnes, what happened? Agnes's lips quivered, her words barely forming. They spoke from the walls. The sisters, they're still here. Clara tried to steady her. You're exhausted. You need rest. Agnes grabbed her wrist, nails digging into her skin. No, you don't understand. They want you to listen. Clara hesitated. Listen to what? Agnes looked past her shoulder, eyes wide with terror. To him. The candles along the table flared violently, and one by one, each flame extinguished, whoosh, 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 plunging them into darkness. A faint, distant singing began, the sound of a choir, beautiful at first, then discordant, twisting, the voices turning into cries. Agnes screamed and covered her ears. Clara pulled her away, dragging her toward the door, but the handle was ice cold, fused shut. The temperature dropped so sharply that Clara could see her breath. Frost crawled up the windows from the outside, forming patterns, spirals and circles, like sigils drawn in ice. Then quiet again. The silence felt like a pressure on her skull, heavy, unnatural. Agnes began to weep softly. "We were told it was an angel," she whispered. "Mother Helena said the light that came through the chapel roof was divine. But when we prayed, it listened. It learned our words. Then it began to speak them back. Through the walls." Clara shuddered. "You mean an echo?" "No," Agnes said, shaking her head violently. "It knew us." From somewhere deep in the convent came a faint sound, the bell. One toll, then two, then three, the same as last night. Clara finally forced the door open. They stumbled into the hall, where the fog outside had seeped through the cracks of the windows, swirling like smoke. "Agnes, come with me," Clara said. "We're leaving this place." Agnes didn't move. She stared down the hall, her expression suddenly calm. "You can't leave. No one leaves until it finishes listening." Her pupils had dilated, black swallowing the iris. Clara stepped back. "Sister, what?" Agnes turned her head toward the wall and whispered something in Latin. A string of words Clara didn't understand. The walls rippled faintly, the plaster warping like soft wax. Then, from within the wall, a voice echoed back. The same phrase, mimicking her perfectly. Agnes's body went rigid. Blood dripped from her nose, her ears. She whispered one last sentence before collapsing. "The silence remembers what we forget." Clara dropped beside her, shaking her shoulders, but the nun only muttered incoherently. On the wall beside them, a faint handprint formed, small and red, as if pressed from inside. Clara backed away, terrified, and fled toward the stairwell. But when she reached the landing, she stopped cold. The portraits lining the hallway, those of long-dead abbesses, had changed. Their faces, once calm, were now distorted in silent screams. The building moaned. The air shifted. The fog pressed against the glass from the outside, blurring the world beyond. Clara realized she was trapped. Not by locks or walls, but by something older, unseen, and awake. She clutched her journal, forcing her shaking hands to write. "There are voices in the stone. I think they are trying to tell me what happened here. But the more I listen, the more it feels as though they are learning my voice in return." Her lamp flickered once more, then went out. In the pitch darkness, a whisper drifted through the corridor, soft and unmistakable. "Clara, welcome to St. Mary's." Clara awoke at dawn with the weight of exhaustion pressing on her chest. Her notebook lay open beside her, though she didn't remember writing the last page. In her own handwriting, beneath the notes from last night, someone had added a single sentence. "He watches through scripture." Her fingers trembled as she shut it. The convent was silent again, the kind of silence that felt too deliberate, as if everything were holding its breath. Sister Agnes had vanished sometime in the night. The only trace left behind was her rosary, lying broken beside the chapel door, the beads scattered across the floor like black tears. Clara gathered them up slowly, each one sticky with a faint residue that smelled faintly of iron. She set them on the altar, her pulse unsteady, and turned toward the confession booths. The wooden panels were carved with ornate symbols. Crosses, wings, halos, but one panel near the base looked newer, freshly sealed. She knelt and pressed her palm against it. The wood was warm. She hesitated, then retrieved her small knife and wedged it into the crack, prying gently. The panel came loose with a groan, revealing a hollow space inside the wall. Dust swirled up like smoke. Within the cavity lay a leather-bound manuscript, large, cracked with age, its cover stamped with gold letters, De Silentio Angelorum, the silence of angels. Clara's breath hitched. She brought it into the light and brushed away the dust. The first page bore an ink illustration of an angel, not a graceful being, but something darker. Wings stretched too wide, feathers streaked black. Its face was hidden beneath a veil, and beneath it, written in Latin, "To silence the voice of sin, one must silence the speaker." As she turned the pages, her hands began to shake. The manuscript chronicled the convent's history, rituals, prayers, exorcisms, and entries in different handwriting, spanning centuries. One passage, dated 1679, described how a celestial being appeared during prayer and demanded the sisters bind their tongues in reverence. Another detailed the punishment for disobedience. To speak without permission is to awaken his hunger. Clara frowned. His. She flipped further, and her stomach tightened. The later entries grew frantic, the writing uneven, blotted with ink or blood. The final pages were written by Mother Superior Helena herself. The light descended, not from heaven but from the pit below it. We thought him divine, yet he fed upon our words, our hymns, our breath. Those who prayed the loudest were taken first. We sealed him beneath the chapel floor. The walls remember. The silence grows. Clara froze as she read the last unfinished line. If these words are found, speak nothing aloud, for he. The ink trailed off, ending in a long, trembling slash. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the chapel, though no window was open. The candles flared high and then extinguished, plunging the room into shadow. Her lamp flickered wildly, illuminating fleeting shapes on the wall, dozens of faint outlines, like silhouettes of kneeling figures. She turned, lamp trembling in her grasp. "Who's there?" The silence answered her. Then, faintly, from somewhere below, she heard a slow scraping sound, like stone dragging against stone. She followed the noise to the altar. The marble tiles beneath it looked slightly uneven. Kneeling down, she traced the edges with her fingers, and felt a thin crack running along the base. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. There was something under the chapel. She glanced around, then used a metal candlestick to wedge into the crack. It took several minutes of pushing and pulling, the sound echoing like a cry through the hall. Finally, one of the tiles lifted just enough for her to see the darkness beneath, and a narrow staircase descending into it. A chill rolled up from below, thick with the smell of damp earth and old incense. She hesitated, clutching her cross necklace. "For the record," she whispered, half to steady herself, half to remind the world she still existed. "This is for documentation purposes." The moment her voice broke the air, the manuscript on the altar snapped shut on its own. Her lamp sputtered once but held. The stairway led into a crypt lined with stone alcoves. Candles, half melted, still burned on the walls. In each alcove lay fragments of bones wrapped in habit cloth. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and candle wax. She lifted her lamp higher and saw writing scratched into the wall. Latin again. The same phrase repeating again and again in shaky script. Silentium est sacramentum. Silence is the sacrament. In the center of the crypt stood a small altar draped in red cloth. Upon it rested an iron-bound box, no larger than a Bible, sealed with a wax symbol, a pair of wings crossed by a blade. Clara reached out, running her fingers over it. The metal vibrated faintly beneath her touch. Suddenly, whispers filled the crypt, hundreds of them, overlapping, merging into one low chant. Her lamp flickered, shadows leaping across the walls like living things. "Stop!" she whispered. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder. Clara stumbled backward, clutching the manuscript against her chest. The box trembled, and from the corner of her eye, she saw movement, one of the skeletal figures twitching. Its head turned ever so slightly toward her, jaw creaking open. A dry, raspy voice escaped from its mouth. "He hears you." Clara bolted up the stairs, slamming the tile shut behind her. The whispers followed for a moment, then faded. She collapsed near the altar, gasping for air, the manuscript still in her grip. The convent was silent again, but it wasn't peace. It was waiting. In her notebook, she wrote with shaking hands, "There is a chamber below the chapel containing remains. The nuns were not murdered by man. The entity they worshipped still lingers. The manuscript confirms it, They sealed something alive beneath St. Mary's. And I think it's beginning to wake. The bell tolled once, slow and hollow. Then, from the far end of the chapel, a whisper called her name. She turned toward the sound, but no one was there. Only the open manuscript, its pages fluttering though there was no wind. On the newest page, in fresh ink that hadn't been there before, one line appeared as she watched. Clara Westwood has spoken. The silence knows her name. Clara had convinced herself that Sister Agnes was gone. Perhaps fled into the fog during the night, driven mad by guilt and isolation. But the next morning, the truth proved darker. She found her in the garden behind the convent. Agnes was kneeling among the overgrown roses, her habit torn, her hands buried in the soil as though digging for something. Her lips moved silently, murmuring a prayer Clara couldn't hear. The earth beneath her fingers was dark, wet, even though it hadn't rained. "Agnes!" Clara called softly. The nun didn't respond. When Clara stepped closer, she saw her eyes wide, glassy, fixed on nothing. Her hands trembled violently as she whispered faster. Clara knelt beside her. "Sister, you need to come inside. You're—" Agnes's hand shot up, gripping Clara's wrist with impossible strength. "He's awake," she hissed. "The silence is awake." Her voice wasn't her own. It carried a low, vibrating echo, as though two people were speaking in perfect unison. Clara's heart pounded. "Who's awake?" Agnes's mouth quivered, and for a moment, her voice softened into something almost human. "We tried to bind him. We sang too loudly. He heard us. Now he speaks through the quiet." Her eyes rolled back, and she began to convulse. Clara held her shoulders, trying to steady her, but Agnes's body arched in violent spasms. Her lips cracked, blood smearing her chin, and from her throat came a sound that didn't belong in this world. A guttural, crawling noise, part growl, part chant. "Saints preserve me," Clara whispered. The air around them grew heavy, charged. Birds scattered from the trees as though sensing something unseen. Clara lifted Agnes's veil and froze. A thin line of dark veins crept from her temples down her neck, pulsing faintly with each heartbeat. Then Agnes's eyes snapped open, entirely black. Her voice came out deeper now, distorted, layered with whispers. "You read the words. You broke the vow. Now he knows your tongue." Clara stumbled back, horrified. "Who are you?" Agnes smiled, slow, unnatural. "The first that spoke," she said. "The first he took." Before Clara could react, Agnes lunged forward, grabbing her shoulders. Their faces nearly touched, and Clara felt the nun's breath, cold and sour, brush her cheek. "Do you know what silence sounds like when it screams?" Agnes whispered. Clara shoved her away and ran for the convent, heart racing. Behind her, the nun began to laugh low, broken, and childlike, before her voice warped into a wail that echoed through the mist. Inside, Clara slammed the chapel door and locked it. Her breath came fast and shallow. The manuscript sat open on the altar again, though she had locked it in her drawer the night before. Its pages were fluttering by themselves, stopping on a passage written in Helena's hand. "When the vessel weakens, he speaks through flesh. Bind her mouth, lest his word escape." Clara backed away, trembling. "No, I won't do that. She's sick, not possessed." But even as she said it, a faint humming began in the walls, low at first, then growing stronger, a chorus of muffled voices rising from the foundation. The floorboards creaked beneath her feet, forming vibrations that matched the rhythm of Agnes's earlier chanting. The bell above the chapel tower began to toll again, once, twice, 3 times, though the rope hung still. Clara ran to the refectory window and peered outside. Agnes was gone from the garden. The roses she had been digging around were flattened into a perfect circle, the soil pulsing faintly as if breathing. A sound behind Clara made her spin. Agnes stood in the chapel doorway. Her habit was soaked with something dark, her bare feet leaving wet prints on the marble floor. Her head was tilted slightly, like a broken doll, and her lips were moving, whispering in rhythm with the bell. Clara's hands shook. "Sister, please stop." Agnes's eyes darted up, and for a moment, her face twisted with something like fear. "You shouldn't have spoken his name," she croaked. "He's been waiting for someone who can read." "What does he want?" Clara demanded. Agnes shuddered violently. Her voice cracked. "He wants what he always wanted, silence. Perfect silence." Then, before Clara could reach her, Agnes screamed. A sound so raw that it rattled the windows. The lamps burst, glass raining onto the floor. Her body contorted backward, spine arching until it seemed ready to snap. The crucifix on the wall above the altar began to spin slowly, then faster, until it tore free and clattered to the ground. Agnes's scream cut off. For a long, terrible moment, she hung limp, then slowly straightened. Her expression was calm, serene. She smiled faintly, as though relieved. Clara whispered, "Agnes." The nun raised her hand and placed a single finger to her lips. "Shoo!" The candles relit themselves, all at once, in perfect unison. Every window slammed shut. And then Clara heard it. A low hum beneath the earth, vibrating through the chapel floor. The sound grew louder until she realized it wasn't sound at all. It was breathing. Agnes turned her gaze toward the altar. "He's listening," she said. Then, with eerie grace, she walked up the aisle and knelt before it. Her head bowed, and in a single motion, she began to tear at the skin around her mouth with her nails, as if to silence herself permanently. Clara screamed and pulled her away, but Agnes's strength was monstrous. Blood smeared her chin, her throat, her hands. Through ragged breaths, she gasped, "He comes through the voice that breaks his silence." Her body went rigid. Then she went still. The convent fell silent. Clara sank to her knees beside her, tears streaking her face. She reached out with trembling fingers to close Agnes's eyes, but before she touched her, the nun's lips twitched, and in a voice not her own, soft and deep, the corpse whispered, "Your turn." The following morning, Evelyn woke to the sound of dripping water echoing from somewhere below her room. The sound wasn't new. She had heard it for days, but this time it seemed closer, heavier, as though something alive was moving within the walls. Her nerves frayed and her curiosity finally stronger than her fear. She took the lantern she had hidden beneath her blanket and descended into the corridor where the air felt cold and damp. The silence there was unnatural, heavy with the scent of stone and mold. Following the sound, Evelyn reached a narrow doorway concealed behind a hanging tapestry of the Virgin Mary. The wall had faint outlines of scratches, as if someone had tried to claw their way through. Her trembling fingers brushed the fabric aside, revealing a wooden door slightly ajar. A faint draft breathed through it, cold and foul, carrying whispers that made her heart pound violently. She hesitated only a moment before stepping through. The staircase descended steeply into darkness, spiral, ancient, carved into the earth. Her lantern flickered, and the flame bent as though pulled downward by unseen hands. Every creak of her boot echoed endlessly. The further she went, the thicker the air became, until she could hardly breathe. Then the sound of chains, faint at first, then louder, made her stop. At the bottom of the stairs was a small chamber. The floor was wet, and the walls were covered in black moss. There were cages, small, narrow, each large enough only for a person to kneel. Inside them, bones rested like forgotten relics, still draped in torn fabric that resembled nun habits. Evelyn's stomach turned. She pressed a hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. Suddenly, the lantern dimmed again. The flame twisted blue, then green. From the far end of the room, something shifted. A scraping sound, metal dragging against stone. Evelyn turned her lantern toward it, and her breath caught in her throat. A figure, tall, gaunt, wearing a veil, was crawling toward her. His hands were raw, nails missing, eyes black as oil. It whispered in a rasping voice, "Confess, confess your sin." Evelyn stumbled backward, nearly dropping the lantern. The figure's voice grew louder, echoing from all directions now. She turned and ran down another passage, the sound of her boots splashing through the water mixing with cries and whispers. The tunnels branched endlessly, one turn after another, until she no longer knew where she was. She ran until the air thinned and she could no longer breathe. Then she saw it. A massive iron door with strange carvings, like Latin prayers twisted into grotesque symbols. On the floor before it was a rosary made of teeth. Her hands shook violently as she reached for it. The instant she touched it, a sharp cry pierced the air, the wail of a dozen voices overlapping. The door began to tremble, and a foul wind burst from the cracks around its frame. Her lantern blew out, leaving her in total darkness. Something cold brushed her face, a hand or something pretending to be one. She froze, every nerve on fire. Then, from behind her, she heard Sister Agnes's voice whisper softly, "Evelyn, you should not be here." A light bloomed suddenly. Sister Agnes stood there, holding a candle that barely lit her face. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were darker than before. Evelyn cried, "What is this place? What happened to them?" Agnes smiled faintly, a tired, sorrowful smile. "These are not the dead," she said. "These are the faithful who would not obey." Before Evelyn could move, the iron door creaked open. The sound was like metal screaming. A gust of freezing wind knocked her backward. From inside, something vast stirred. Heavy breathing, chains rattling. Agnes fell to her knees and began praying in Latin, her voice trembling. Evelyn scrambled to her feet, dropped her lantern, and ran. Not knowing where, only knowing she had to get out. Behind her, the prayer turned into shrieking. The walls seemed to pulse with life, whispering in unison. Her legs burned as she climbed the endless stairs, until finally, she saw faint daylight seeping from a crack above. She burst through the door, slamming it shut behind her, collapsing on the stone floor of the hallway. Her hands were bleeding, her heart thundering. She looked back at the tapestry she'd come through. The Virgin Mary's painted eyes now seemed to weep blood. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the faces of those skeletal nuns in their cages. Mouths frozen mid-scream, eyes hollow. The walls of her room felt alive, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The convent bell hadn't rung since she came back from the tunnels, and the silence of St. Mary's was more terrifying than any scream could ever be. By dawn, she decided she couldn't keep this secret any longer. She needed answers, and the only person who might tell her the truth was Mother Superior Isolde. The woman had vanished days ago, but Evelyn had seen the locked chapel door. No one went in or out since. That morning, she approached it with shaking hands. The chapel's wooden doors were sealed by a chain wrapped in rosaries. Every crucifix on it was upside down. The air smelled of burned incense and rot. Evelyn hesitated, then picked up a broken iron candle stand and smashed the lock. The sound echoed down the empty hall. Inside, the chapel was not what she remembered. The altar was gone. In its place stood a stone slab engraved with the same symbols she had seen on the iron door below. Candles burned black flames, their smoke curling in unnatural patterns toward the ceiling. And on the walls, hundreds of rosaries hung, each made not of beads, but of human teeth. At the center of the slab knelt Mother Isolde. Her veil was gone, her head shaved, her eyes red and swollen as if she hadn't slept in weeks. When she spoke, her voice was barely human. "You should not have opened the tunnels," she whispered. "You've let it stir again." Evelyn's voice trembled. "What is it? What happened to the sisters?" Isolde looked at her with eyes full of both madness and sorrow. "We made a covenant," she said slowly. "This convent was built upon ground where no holy thing could thrive. Long before the church came, the villagers worshipped something here, something ancient, bound beneath the earth. When the first sisters arrived, we were told to cleanse it with prayer. But instead, it whispered promises. Salvation, purity, eternity." She raised her hands. The skin was cracked and gray. "We prayed, Evelyn. We fasted. And it answered. It gave us miracles, no sickness, no aging. But the price was devotion. We had to give ourselves completely." Evelyn stepped back, her stomach turning. "You're saying you worshipped it?" Mother Isolde laughed, a sound both sad and hysterical. We became it. At that moment the candles flared. The chapel trembled as if an earthquake had struck. The rosaries rattled violently, teeth clattering together. Evelyn turned toward the door, but it slammed shut by itself. The stained glass windows began to bleed red. Shadows moved behind them, tall, hooded forms chanting in Latin, their voices merging into one rising cry. Isolde rose from her knees, eyes glowing faintly. "It's too late to run," she whispered. "It wants to be whole again." The stone slab cracked open down the center. From the fissure oozed a black liquid, thick as tar, crawling toward her shoes. Evelyn screamed and backed away, but the shadows from the walls stretched toward her like arms. They grabbed her wrists, cold and strong. From the dark crack, a figure began to rise, impossibly tall, faceless, its body wrapped in what looked like fragments of nun habits soaked in blood. The chanting grew deafening. Every candle burst at once, plunging the chapel into pulsing red light. Mother Isolde fell to her knees again. "Forgive me, O Lord of mercy," she sobbed. The creature's head turned toward her, and its arm, a long, blackened limb, reached down and touched her. In an instant, she froze, her body crumbling into dust. Evelyn tore free and ran. The doors flung open for her this time, as if mocking her attempt to escape. She sprinted through the corridors, her heartbeat echoing louder than her footsteps. The air was thick with whispers, voices calling her name, weeping, laughing. The other nuns appeared in the hallways, their faces pale, eyes void, moving like puppets. They reached for her, chanting softly, "Join us, sister, join us." She reached the courtyard, but even the sky looked wrong. Gray clouds swirling into a black spiral above the bell tower. Lightning struck, illuminating the convent roof where a figure stood, tall, veiled, glowing faintly red. Evelyn realized it was Sister Agnes, but her face had changed, stretched. Her mouth split wide in a monstrous smile. Agnes raised her arms, and from the earth below, dozens of skeletal hands began clawing out of the ground. Evelyn screamed and ran toward the gate, but the convent walls now seemed endless, stretching in every direction. She fell to her knees, sobbing. The ground trembled again, and the sound of the bell, silent for years, rang once. The toll was long, deep, and final. Everything went silent. Even the storm paused. Then, in a voice that came from everywhere at once, a whisper said, "You are ours now, Evelyn." The gates burst open, but beyond them, there was no village, no path, no dawn. Only an endless field of fog and shadows stretching forever. Evelyn stood frozen, tears streaking her face. Behind her, the chapel doors creaked open one last time. The black figure emerged, walking slowly into the lightless courtyard, every step echoing like a heartbeat. And as Evelyn turned toward it, she saw what no living person ever should, her own face beneath its veil. The world around Evelyn dissolved into something unrecognizable. The air was thick as ash, the sky swirling like bruised flesh. The convent stood behind her, dark and hollow, its spires twisted as though alive. She could no longer tell if she was awake or trapped in the visions that had haunted her since the tunnels. Every breath she took came out as fog, and each exhale whispered her name back at her. "Evelyn, Evelyn." She stumbled forward, clutching the rusted crucifix that had fallen from her neck. The ground beneath her feet was soft and uneven. Not soil, but flesh-like, pulsing faintly. From somewhere far off, the bell tolled again. Not once, but 3 times, and with every strike, the convent's windows lit up with red light, revealing shadowy forms of nuns standing motionless behind the glass. Her thoughts began to fragment. Was I ever outside? Did I ever leave? She turned back toward the chapel doors. They were wide open, waiting for her. Inside, faint chanting rose, low and sorrowful, the sound of hundreds of voices praying in perfect unison. Evelyn walked toward the chapel, drawn like a moth to its glow. The interior was transformed, the walls covered in rosaries that now pulsed with dim light, as though each bead contained a trapped soul. The altar slab, once cracked, now repaired itself, whole again, shining faintly with wet blackness. And there, standing before it, was Sister Agnes. Her face was pale as wax, her eyes pitch black, but her smile was calm, almost kind. "Welcome home, Evelyn," she said softly. "You were never meant to escape. None of us were." Evelyn's voice trembled. "You're not Agnes. You're it." Agnes tilted her head, amused. "Does it matter anymore who I am? The flesh changes, the faith remains. You saw beneath the convent. You saw what we preserved. You heard the voices of the sisters who tried to defy it, and you saw what defiance costs." Evelyn took a step forward, shaking. "You killed them." "No," Agnes whispered. "They offered themselves. Every prayer we uttered was a link in the chain that bound him. Every generation of nuns. A sacrifice to keep the covenant unbroken. You came here thinking you were sent by the church. But the church sent you because it knew what this place demands. A replacement." Evelyn's heart stopped for a moment. "A replacement?" Agnes smiled wider. "The cycle cannot end. The last nun must always remain to pray, to feed the silence, to seal the door." The chanting grew louder now. The floor beneath them trembled. From the shadows of the chapel, ghostly figures began to appear. The missing nuns, their faces distorted, mouths moving in prayer. One by one, they dropped to their knees, facing Evelyn. Agnes raised her hand. "Kneel, Sister Evelyn." Evelyn stumbled backward, clutching the crucifix tighter. "No, I won't become one of you." The candles flared. The black ooze began seeping from the cracks in the walls, crawling toward her like living veins. The air thickened with whispers. "Pray, pray, pray," endless, suffocating. Evelyn screamed and threw the crucifix toward Agnes. It struck her chest, and for a split second, the chapel fell silent. The nuns froze. The flames went white. Then, a deafening roar shattered the silence. A sound not of this world. The crucifix burned with blinding light, and the walls cracked open, releasing waves of wind and light that tore through the room. Agnes screamed. A sound that split into 1,000 voices, and her body began to unravel into smoke. Evelyn ran. The hallway collapsed around her. The convent groaned, its very structure fighting to remain whole. As she reached the main gates, the floor behind her split open, revealing the tunnels beneath, glowing red like an open wound. From within, black arms reached up, grasping for her ankles, dragging her backward. She clawed at the earth, screaming, her nails tearing. Just as one hand closed around her leg, a blinding flash burst across the courtyard. The bell tower collapsing, the chapel engulfed in flames of holy light. The hand released her, shrieking as it burned away. Evelyn crawled out through the broken gate, collapsing on the cold ground beyond. The convent behind her was now ablaze, the sky turning gold with unnatural fire. For a moment it looked like dawn, beautiful and terrible. She lay there, weeping, her body trembling. Then, faintly, she heard the whisper again, soft, almost gentle. "Pray for us?" She turned. The convent was gone. Only a field of mist remained. Weeks later, when a group of travelers passed by that hill, they found no ruins. Just an old iron gate half buried in the grass, and a single nun kneeling before it, praying silently. Her face was pale, her eyes vacant, her lips moving in endless devotion. No one knew her name, but when night fell, the toll of a single bell echoed through the valley, and the whisper of 1,000 nuns rose with the wind.